people that hopefully you could bring some warm weather with you. Well, I think he brought the weather with him from the Arctic. So, but it was definitely a blessing. We got in yesterday around 7 o'clock, and it's just been a blessing. This morning I got up, and I'm like, wow, this car is not going to want to start. And lo and behold, Pastor was the one that had the issue. But praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Everything's gone well with us so far. As Pastor said, we were down in Mexico. Right now we have been on deputation since September of last year. 2 years technically. September of 2022. September 7th was our first one. So roughly we're right around 15 months, and the Lord has provided about 75% of our support. We've been in 90 different churches in about 26 different states, and the Lord has definitely been taking care of us. I don't even know how many miles we've driven at this point, but the Lord has definitely protected us on the way to wherever He's taken us, and it's just been a blessing. So while we were down in Mexico, trying to visit my wife's family while we were down there, we were already looking for property. We're looking for a place to either purchase for our home or looking for different houses. So we were trying to kill two birds with one stone while we were down there. So now we're back home, getting back onto the road again and going back on deputation. Lord willing, we want to be able to start doing all of our paperwork and everything like that by June or July of this year. So that's kind of our goal for deputation. But the Lord is definitely, I think, hopefully getting us there a little sooner than that. But we're leaving it in the Lord's hands, and He's definitely never failed us up until now, and I doubt He will ever fail us. And so it's definitely a blessing to be here with you. As Pastor said, right now we are going to give our testimonies. I'm going to have my wife come up and do her testimony first. I do want to just let everybody know we probably might need some tissues up here. My wife does struggle to get through her testimony a little bit. I'm just preparing you guys for it. There's a lot of ups and downs where the Lord has brought us from, and it's all for His honor and His glory. We're not how do I say it? We're not trying to have a person feel sorry for where the Lord's brought us. But the thing is that I believe that our stories, from where we were born to where we're at now, there has been tragic things that have happened. There has been very positive things that have happened. But it's all because I believe the Lord has a tremendous plan for what He's called us to do. And I'm very grateful for it. Okay. She has something right now, so she's good. But I appreciate the invitation, Pastor. And we do have our display table in the back. If you'd like to go ahead and pick up our prayer cards, we have two different ones. I'll get into that in a little bit. But we also have two Mexican flags back there. A church gave us a whole bunch of little Mexican flags to pass out to the kids. So there's two left. So whatever kid would like them, feel free. And if it's a kid that's 90 years old, that's fine too. But you can feel free to grab those Mexican flags back there. I appreciate it. Thank you, Pastor.
In Monterrey, Mexico. So I'm going to go back a little bit just to let you know how everything started. My mom moved out of her house when she was 14 years old to go to the city because she was born outside the city. So she came to the city and started working when she was 14 years old. She at that time when she was working, she met my dad, and they become boyfriend girlfriend, and they were dating for I want to say a few years, and at that time, Mom was 14, Dad was 17, so they started dating, and my mom continued working and all that. But it wasn't until my mom was 21 years old, she got pregnant. She got pregnant, and my dad wasn't ready. That's what he said. He wasn't ready to be a dad. He had come from a family where grandma passed away on her 4th C-section. So left a baby behind. My dad was one of 4, and he was 5 years old when she passed. So she was raised by a stepmom, but not a very good stepmom. So he really hated life. He hated everything. But when he was with my mom, he felt like that was home for him. So mom got pregnant, and he's like, well, I don't know how to act. I don't know what to say. I'm not ready to be a dad. I'm still young. So my mom is like, fine, I'll have my baby, and we're not going to live with you. She's not going to have your last name. She's going to be mine. So before my mom got pregnant, there was a small mission that was getting started. And she was invited to this mission. People were knocking on doors and kept inviting her. And my mom was raised Catholic. So she's like, no, because what is grandma going to say and grandpa's going to say? So she kind of rejected that. But God was working in her heart. And I can tell that my mom, when people came to her and started talking to her about the word, she could feel something different. But she was scared. So she kept putting it aside and putting it aside. Well, she got pregnant, and she had me. So 3 days later, somebody came again and knocked on her door and say, hey, you want to go to church? She's like, fine. She didn't have anything else. So she went to church, and she got saved that day. Yeah. So that church started, that mission started with me being the first baby there. So my mom has been in that church 34 years. Still serving there as a single mom for the first 5 years. After 5 years, Dad came back and said, you know what? I do want to marry. Let's get married. And they got married and had 3 more kids. My dad is not saved till today. My mom always took us to church. And I'm so thankful that she loved God. She loves God. But it was hard as a kid being in church and not having your dad there. Because everybody looked at you like you were weird. Your dad wasn't there. Why is just your mom? A lot of people always talk to my mom and say, are you single? She's like, no, I do have a husband, but he doesn't want anything to do with the Lord. So my mom keeps serving. The church opened a Christian school. And my mom always had the burden to take us to a Christian school. So she put us in a Christian school. My dad is like, well, you can do whatever you want. I'm not paying for the Christian school because they were not associated with the government down there. So my dad wasn't for that. So my mom is like, that's fine. Just give me permission to put the kids in the Christian school. And my dad is like, okay, you can. So my mom put us in the Christian school. We started learning English. Their focus was to train us to serve God, but as a side thing, to learn English. So that's how I started learning English. So we kept serving. My mom was always faithful. She was always at church, always took her kids. And it was sad to see my mom stand there and her dedicate all her kids by herself, not having a dad there, even though we had a dad, but he wasn't there. And she's like, I'm going to serve God with him or without him. So she continued. We started growing up. So it was me. I had 2 other sisters and a baby brother. And to be honest with you, that was the best life. I was so happy. I didn't need anything else. That's what I thought. I thought that I was saved because my mom was saved. So because she had been through so much, why was God going to be mean to me and not allow me to go to heaven when my mom has been there all the time? But it wasn't until I was 16 years old. We went to visit grandma. And my youngest sister had an accident. She went into the bathroom, and the sink fell and cut her jugular longwise. My sister died in my arms when I was 16 years old. And I blamed myself for so long. I didn't understand how God was doing that to my mom when she was so faithful. I didn't understand why everything that she had been through, why was it enough? Why he had to punish her, because that's how I saw it. I told my mom, Mom, let's stop going to church. It's not helping. God doesn't love you. Look, he took one of her sisters. My mom is like, remember when I dedicate all my kids? I said, yes. She's like, okay. So that means they were not mine. He can do whatever he wants. If he wants to take all of you guys, he can. And I'm still going to serve him. And I'm still going to be okay with it. I can count with my hands how many times I see my mom cry. She was always very strong. Never cried much. And I feel like that's what made me strong. So I battle with this bitterness for 2 years. After 2 years, I started helping Mrs. Johnson, which was the principal of the school. She also was a missionary. They were serving there for, I think they served for like 36 years. And I was helping her grade some papers while she was giving the Bible lesson. And in that Bible lesson, I heard the first time when she said that she had lost a sister in a car accident. I never knew that because she never really said that. But I think that's what the Lord was using at that time. I could see that we had been through the same things. She's like, but you know what? My sister was saved, and I know I'm going to see her again. And seeing her being so 100% sure that she was going to see her, I didn't have that. And I was like, well, but my mom is saved, so that makes me saved, and things like that. And after, I was eager for class to finish because I wanted to talk to her. So class was over, and I talked to her. I sat down and talked to her, and she's like, this is a personal decision. And I remember when I was 18 years old, December 8th, I got saved, and that's when my life just changed. I saw everything different. I can't tell you that I really understood my mom because I didn't. And until today, I can't understand how strong the Lord, how strong she has been, because God has always been with her. I'm a mom now, and I would not imagine losing a kid. But my mom always says that if God is with you, he knows and he's going to help you through everything. So I continued serving. I remember going to the house and telling Mom that I got saved, and she was so excited. I didn't know what that meant. I just like, okay, I'm saved. What's next? I wanted to go to the mission field and go help somebody, but I didn't have the resources. So my mom is like, let's start little by little. You can help here. So I started involving myself in junior church and helping out. I love kids, and I love working with kids. I was a teacher for so long, even in public schools and all that. So the Lord started using my life to go to public schools and start teaching English as a second language. So that was my opportunity to start witnessing to kids, because one thing that I put in my heart, maybe that's the only person that they're going to see with a Christian person, because their parents were not. Most of the public school kids' parents are not Christians or saved. So I started working, and my mom was so excited. My siblings are still serving in the church. My mom's still serving there, like I said. But it wasn't like, I think I was 22. I started dating Galvino. And this is so weird because we have known each other since we were kids. He came down to Mexico when he was 9. And he was in the Christian school, so we met there. But didn't work. I wasn't interested. I always, my mind as a Mexican, your mind is like, get married, live close to Mom. So I never thought that I was gonna get married to somebody, to an American and move. So when I was 21 years old, Galvino started like talking to me, and I'm like, no, Galvino, like, I already know you, and I don't wanna date you, and things like that. But the Lord had something. The Lord had something. And that's when I started realizing that he also came from a broken household. I didn't know that, even though we were raised mainly together in school. But I didn't know his part of the story because I never gave him the time to. So when we started dating, I figured things, and the Lord started working, and the Lord started working. And then one day he said, I want to serve God. And I'm like, I want to serve God because I don't come from a family like that. My mom and my dad, just my mom was serving. My dad wasn't. But I didn't want that life for me. I didn't want to be in a church where there was not a dad. I wanted my kids to have both of their parents there. But I'm also here to say that it is possible. Even if you're a single mom with kids in church, it is possible. The Lord can do big things. I never thought that I was going to be now a missionary headed back to my country. But seeing my mom and everything that she did, dating Galvino, getting married, him telling me, I'm going to serve God with you, without you. It's like, okay, I'll stay here. I want to serve. I don't care where. I just want to serve. So when he said we're going back to Mexico, at first, I didn't want to go back to Mexico. Because you were raised with Mexicans and you just see them as people. You really don't see their souls and you don't see them as they need Christ. So I'm like, can we go somewhere else? He's like, no, we're going to Mexico. So the Lord brought me from Mexico to Ohio, and that's where my heart changed. Now I didn't see Mexico as my home. I saw Mexico as my mission field. And now my love grew for my Mexican people. So I can't wait to get to the field. I know there's a lot of people there waiting. And there's a lot of single moms that we can help. And I am so excited to go back and serve and be a part in God's ministry because it's his ministry. But I'm also thankful for the mom he gave me, the mom that always was there, faithful, and I'm so blessed to be her daughter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, babe. It's always good to hear that, the testimony. She doesn't get an opportunity. Thank you, Pastor. She doesn't get an opportunity that much in order to give her testimony. But wherever she does, I know it's always been a blessing. But I'll share my testimony with you real quick. I come from a single-parent household. My mom had me out of wedlock when she was 23 years old. But my mom had gotten saved at the University of Toledo in Ohio. I'm the fifth generation of American Mexicans of our family born here in the States. And my mom, like I said, had gotten saved, but she had stepped away from the things of God months after she had gotten saved because the lady led my mom to the Lord, passed away in a car accident. She was headed to school and went to pass a semi, and when she pulled out, another semi hit her head on, and she was killed in that car accident. So instead of continuing on and trying to understand what the Lord had planned for my mom and where he was taking her, my mom actually reverted back to what she knew best, which she was already going against the grain a little bit with our family religion, being Hispanic. You're just Catholic because of birth. You're Catholic because that's what Grandma and Grandpa were, and that's what your parents are. Even though they don't practice it, you're Catholic. And so my mom reverted back to that because she was already, like I said, going against the grain. Everybody didn't like her now being saved and Baptist, and so she didn't want to have that conflict anymore. So as she continued to revert back, lo and behold, she knew my dad for a while. My mom and my dad were on and off dating, and then one day they just had me and out of wedlock. And fortunately, my dad did not stick around. My dad actually went on and continued on with his life, and my mom had me and just tried to balance out a single parent's life and tried to work and be a mom. But I spent most of my time with my grandparents, actually my grandpa. My grandma actually passed away when I was 9 months old, so my grandpa got remarried when I was 2, and a lot of different dynamic changes that were happening in my life, but the Lord understood why. And it wasn't until I was about 6 years old that I just asked my mom out of the blue if we could go to church. And my mom fell under conviction, and she knew that it was wrong for us not to be in church. And she made a covenant to the Lord that day, saying that she was going to give me the best Christian heritage possible. And we started going back to the church where my mom had gotten saved and where she had gotten baptized. And that was about an hour and a half one way. And we were there Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday, and Saturdays for visitation. And whenever the church opened up, we were there. My mom and I just submerged ourselves as much as possible inside the church in order to do whatever the Lord was leading us to do. And the Lord started working on my mom's heart within the next 3 years on just opening up and doing more for Him, not just to be content with what she was doing, but to strive to do a little bit more. It was a little bit of a financial burden to be traveling that far to go to church, so we started looking for a church closer to home. We found a little country church about 15 minutes from our house, and so we went over there and looked at the church and prayed about the church, and lo and behold, ended up joining the church. It was a phenomenal church. They were running about 60, and they were the pastor was an amazing guy. He had memorized the whole New Testament, and it was just a phenomenal, soul-winning, on fire, revivals all the time church. And unfortunately, about 2.5 months after us arriving there, the pastor fell into sin and had to resign. And the church split from having 60 down to 25 within a service. And unfortunately, I got news about in October that church has now completely died off. Now my mom is faced, with the decision: do we go with the split? Do we stay? What do we do? And my mom, getting away with the Lord, made a covenant again to the Lord, saying, with or without a pastor, we're going to serve God where He's placed us. That's kind of the same decision that she made with the family. With or without a father, with or without a husband, we're going to serve God. And so we continued on knocking on doors and inviting people out to church and tried to soul witness and all this different stuff. We were trying to just be effective for the Lord, and most of the time it was just her and I. And sometimes it was another gentleman in the church. But the Lord was definitely using us in order to start getting some type of training there at this church, because my mom started getting involved in the children's class and doing a whole bunch of different stuff, trying to just keep the church flowing with some type of life. And lo and behold, about a year later, we had a church pastor that came in, candidated, and we ended up voting him in, and he was now our pastor. But during that time, the Lord started working on my mom's heart on being in full-time service for Him. I can't get into it too much into depth, but the Lord, because if not, I would be here for another hour, but the Lord started working in His only divine way, in His masterpiece of His divine plan. And my mom got in contact through 3 different pastors with the same woman, that these 3 pastors did not even talk, but they told my mom to connect with this single parent lady that was serving in Monterrey, Mexico. My mom contacted that lady after the 3rd pastor told her to contact her. And my mom went down for a survey trip down to Monterrey, met the Johnsons, and lo and behold, that's where my mom knew where the Lord was calling us to go, to work in the Christian school alongside with the veteran missionaries that were down there. And on October 15th, 2001, if anybody remembers that time, that was a month after 9/11. We crossed into Mexico and started working with the veteran missionaries. My mom actually became my wife's 5th and 6th grade teacher that first year, and I was now part of a Christian school. I had a title. I was an MK, if anybody knows what that is, a missionary kid. I know all of them know what that means, but an MK. And so now I was almost living and breathing everything about church. I was at church before the church building opened up, even after it closed down, and we were there always. Church almost became my second home. And it was just always trying to strive to see more souls when discipleship started. And my mom was just rearing and gearing and serving the Lord. And I was now a part of the Christian school too. I entered into the third grade and learning Bible verses, not just the verses, but chapters on end from John 10, John 15, the Romans Road, Ephesians 4, 5, and 6. All these different foundational chapters, what I had to learn by heart. And I could memorize all these chapters and all these verses, and I could be in MK and I could be in church, but none of that made me saved. And I knew that I wasn't saved, but I wanted to play the part and not truly be a part. I wanted to blend in and act like I was, but I knew there was something missing. I was too scared in order to admit that I wasn't saved, because I didn't want that to affect my mom's ministry. And that's something that kind of happens when you're growing up in the ministry, is that you understand that there's a level of pressure that comes with this territory, that if you do or say something that can affect the ministry, it doesn't end well. And I tried to hide not being saved because I didn't want it to ripple into the whole entire church and have somebody come out and point out to my mom, why did you leave Ohio in order to come down to the state and down to Mexico in order to win souls, and yet your son is not saved? Unfortunately, I believe that the devil was using that in order for me to be blinded by my own need for a Savior. And I struggled with that for about 2 years. And one day when we were in the church service for the first anniversary of a church plant, the third church that was planted by the veteran missionaries. We were there. We had helped them start the church, and it was their first anniversary. Everybody's excited. The other two churches showed up. We had a college that came down, brought in about 40, 45 preacher boys in that time, and the preacher came down, and the guest preacher, everybody was excited. This church building was probably packed with about 300 people, and this preacher was just encouraging the people to strive to do more for the Lord, not just to be complacent with what they've done, but always to grow spiritually, but also in number, and just to push forward, push towards the mark, and always just moving forward and moving forward. And I remember that service because I remember how the guest preacher just got all beet red, and he's preaching, and I love the dynamic on how he preached. And then the invitation came. Everything was very standard. I mean, I've been in church ever since I was 6 years old. He said, every head bowed, every eye closed, nobody looking around. And we did that. And he said, if you're saved tonight, please raise your hand. I knew I wasn't saved because I knew I hadn't made that personal decision for myself, but I was too scared to admit it. And then he followed up that question. He said, if you're not saved tonight, know that hell is waiting for you. And the torture and torment there will not stop, will never stop for all eternity. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. Because I knew I was on my way to hell because I hadn't asked for forgiveness of my sins. I understood right then and there that Jesus Christ came to seek and to save that which was lost. And I was in need of a Savior. But I didn't raise my hand. I didn't come to the altar. I gripped a hold of the pew. That night we went home, and we were living with the veteran missionaries, and that's where the guest preachers would stay in the big groups. It was a decent-sized house. And that night we were trying to have dinner, and I'm trying to eat, and I was so much under conviction I couldn't even really swallow. I don't know if you guys have ever been there. But I was sitting down trying to eat, and the guest preacher sitting to my left, and he's quiet, I'm quiet, and everybody else is kind of goofing off, having a great time. They're on a missions trip. I get done with my food and go put my plate inside of the kitchen, and lo and behold, the guest preacher does too. And there in the kitchen, he comes right next to me and gives me a side hug and smiles and doesn't say a word, but just smiles at me. He goes up to bed, and I go up to bed because I had school the next morning. But I was sleeping in the midst of all the guest preacher, all the preacher boys. And that night, I just tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. And around 2:30 in the morning, I roll over and I grab one of the preacher boys and said, "Hey, man, I'm not saved. I need to get saved right now." He grabs his Bible, and we go outside onto the patio, not to wake anybody else up. And he starts taking me through the Romans road. And I stop him after the first verse. And I said, "Hey, man, I already know these verses by heart. Let's pray." I was so primed with the gospel at that point that I knew if I waited one more second and I were to die in that second, I was going to spend eternity in hell. And that night I cried out to the Lord, and I asked him and begged him to forgive me of all my sins because I knew I was unworthy in order to go by my own merit. It wasn't because I was an MK or because of anything that I had done or because of the works that I had done. It was only by the grace of God that I could get there. And that night, I cried out to the Lord and asked him to save me. And I know he did so. And I usually say I slept like a baby that night, but if anybody's ever had babies, they don't sleep throughout the night. But that next morning, I got up and I went downstairs and I told my mom what I had done. I told the guest preacher, I told the veteran missionaries, and I told the guest preacher what I had done. And that guest preacher just smiled from ear to ear, and he said, "Galvino, I saw that you didn't raise your hand last night." You have to think, I was in the midst of probably 300 people. I mean, how in the world did he point me out? He said, "I stayed up all night praying for you to get right with the Lord." As I said previously, I come from a single-parent household. I didn't have my dad in my life, but I'm so grateful because I had men of God that were a father figure to me. I had men of God that invested into me personally through just showing me and taking me under their wings on what it was to be a man of God, to what it was to do the work of the ministry, and to love the people that you're ministering to. Not just to take it as a job, but to do it because that's what the Lord's called us to do. And what I'm going to do is tonight I'll give you the next part of this story before our video on how I know how the Lord has called us into the ministry. But the Lord has definitely taken us through ups and downs in our lives, and broken homes to tragic accidents that happen in life. But at the end of the day, it's all for His honor and glory. It's not because I'm more spiritual than you are. I'm just an ordinary person that just wanted to submit themselves and to be used of God. And I would just like to encourage you. I'm going to be wrapping up here in just a couple of minutes. But if you hear my wife's story or my story, I'm pretty much not that much different than your average Joe, or probably much than you are. The thing is that I would encourage you, find out what the Lord's trying to do in your life and follow His leading in your life. Sometimes as we're going on and I get to share my testimony, I have grown men, 6'4", 6'5". I mean, I'm not even 6 foot. I mean, I'm 5'6" on a good day. When it's nice and warm. And I just hear them cry. And they come up and they just want to hug on me. And they're just like, "Man, I come from a broken home myself. And I'm so bitter what the Lord has put me through." And I'll be honest with you. I've been bitter myself too. But bitterness comes from not trusting in God. And I would just like to encourage you, with what the Lord puts through your path is a preparation for something that He can use it for His honor and His glory in the future. My wife told a little bit about what their family has been through. And I'll probably talk about that tonight. But my mother-in-law has used that to see many souls being saved because she's been able to identify with people that have lost children throughout the years. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, the veteran missionaries that we worked under, was one of the ladies that counseled my mother-in-law after the tragic accident. And she was there and hugged on my mother-in-law and loved on her. Well, the tables turned in 2020, September 21st of 2020. Mrs. Johnson lost her 42-year-old daughter in a car accident. And about 3 months later, I was able to bring my mother-in-law up, and my mother-in-law was able to minister to Mrs. Johnson. They stayed up all night and just talked. My mother-in-law was able to hug on Mrs. Johnson, the one that was her counselor during that time. I just say that because at the end of the day, as a pastor friend of mine said, we're just a puzzle piece in the masterpiece of the Lord. It's his ministry, not ours. We're the laborers. He's the husbandman. So we just need to be working in his vineyard. And here's the thing, is that as we move forward, just understand, God doesn't make mistakes. Even though people, humanly speaking, think it, he doesn't. Because at the end of the day, everything that happened to Job, everything that's happened in my life, everything that's happened in your life and my wife's life is for a purpose. And it's for his honor and his glory. Preacher.
Appreciate those testimonies this morning. And you know, the great part about this, I can't make this stuff up. This is God writing his story on different lives. And one of the things I've encouraged our missionaries to do when they come through is to share their testimonies for this very purpose. Each one has a different testimony. There were some things I just jotted down here. Mrs. Hernandez, you said, I can't understand how strong my mom is. I would say this, that's grace. That's God's grace. I can sit here in the same way and think, I don't know how I would ever go through a situation like that. But God's grace is sufficient. I think about, Brother Hernandez, your testimony, and it reminds me just how crafty Satan is in his blinding of the lost. You had heard, you had memorized the verses, you had all the head knowledge, and yet he'll use a tactic of what will the rest of the church think when they find out that the missionary son isn't saved. He'll use anything he can use to keep somebody out of heaven. But you know what? God's also able to use any one of us to minister to somebody. And I wrote down as well, Mrs. Hernandez, when you were teaching there, you said, it may be that I'm the only Christian they'll ever see. And you know, there's some good truth for us to remember in that. We live in a world that's getting darker and darker, and you live on a block where you might be the only Christian that someone ever sees. Don't go through life thinking, oh, somebody else will take care of it. The preacher will take care of it. The TV will take care of it. Take ownership of these things and be a blessing to people. And boy, my heart was touched just to hear how the preacher was praying that night for your salvation. I am all for the work of the ministry, but my friend, I think heaven will only reveal the things that are accomplished through prayer. And a pastor who noticed, who saw that, he didn't pull you aside from your supper and say, no, you didn't raise your hand, you have to get this right. He went right to the throne of grace. I serve a Holy Spirit who's very strong, who's very powerful, and I'm thankful that you responded to that, but what a blessing it is. I appreciate you sharing your testimonies. I know it makes you vulnerable, makes you open. It's helpful to us. Having been a missionary, I'll say this, church, it's made me a different pastor than I probably would have ever been. I don't regret that at all. I told Brother Hernandez, I said, I expect that you know how to preach. I expect you to do that. And he'll preach here in the morning service. But this that we've had in the Sunday school hour, this was not wasted time at all. This is a valuable insight for us to see how God is at work in their lives. And my friend, he's at work in your lives. There are people in this auditorium who can relate to the fact of, I've made a decision to serve God regardless of whether my husband will or not. And God is faithful. God will honor that. Did it happen in the first year? No. Did it happen in the second year? No. Your testimony, your dad still is without Christ, as I understand it. But the story's not over yet. God is still at work, and we serve a big God. He's able to do great things. You trust him. You walk with him and watch him do great and mighty things. Let's be dismissed in a word of prayer this morning, and then we'll read.